This week on the Communicators, we'll look at the outcome of television stations in the U.S. who this week switched to digital. Our guest is FCC Commissioner Jonathan Adlestein.
This is the Communicators program. This week, Jonathan Adlestein, FCC Commissioner, here to join in the questioning, Amy Schatz of the Wall Street Journal. Commissioner Adelstein, thank you for being with us on the Communicators.
Thanks for having me.
I want to start with the digital transition. Did you support the delay, the final delay until June 12th, or did you think it was important to move ahead on February 17th? And either way, why?
I thought we weren't ready for February 17th. It was poorly planned, poorly managed, and if it had occurred nationwide, it would have been a bit chaotic for many over-the-air television viewers. So I felt it was important to give the FCC, the NTIA, and the administration more time to put together a coherent plan to make sure that we dealt with all those people who might be disenfranchised, be they low income or elderly, members of minority groups, people with disabilities. There was a lot of at-risk communities that I felt we hadn't really reached out to adequately and prepared for the transition. I mean, 1 in 20 Americans, according to Nielsen, wasn't ready. We managed to get the delay through Congress, and I think we now are in a position to learn from what happened on February 17th when, after all, a lot of stations went, and benefit from those lessons.
So what changes between now and June 12th at the FCC? Is it more money? Is it a different organization? What happens?
One of the biggest problems was that the coupon program ran out of money. Congress set aside $40, up to 2 coupons worth $40 for each family that needed to make the transition, so they wouldn't have to pay the full cost of a converter box, which takes the analog signal and converts it to digital, so you don't have to buy a new television. But that money ran out sometime in early January, which was really tragic for families that needed help in order to make the transition. Congress didn't want people to have to bear the burden themselves. They wanted to facilitate this. After all, the government was changing the programming nature of it so that the consumer would lose their signal, which was really unprecedented. We wanted to facilitate that for them. Unfortunately, I don't think Congress was adequately notified by the previous administration of the fact that there was not enough money to support the converter box program going forward. So it would be really unfair to so many people that were on a waiting list. Now the waiting list is up to 5 million people, to have them apply for and ask for coupons that Congress intended them to get and have them not available to consumers in order to facilitate the transition. So that was the biggest thing. Now Congress has approved funding, $650 million, up to that much, for the converter box program, for additional outreach efforts. We now have more time, we have resources, and the coupon program is up and running again.
Do you see further legislation needed or in the future?
I think Congress has done what it needs to do. It's delayed, it's given flexibility to broadcasters who wanted to go forward, and it's restored funding for the converter box program. Now it's up to the administration and the FCC to have a coordinated, coherent program in order to get this transition to work smoothly for viewers.
So stations throughout the day on Tuesday were switching over. They started around noon after their local broadcasts, and they were doing it all the way up through midnight. About a third of the stations across the country have already switched. From your perspective at the FCC, how did it go?
It went better than expected. We really made a big difference, I think, when we took the month beforehand and put huge resources into the ground, put resources particularly in those markets that were making the switch early. And a number of markets did go early. Even though, as you said, it was about 36% of the markets went early, it only represented about 13% of the population. So they tended to be smaller markets and not larger markets. So we still have a long way to go. But those that went, we found that we were able to handle the call volumes, we were able to handle the issues that were raised, and I think it gives us some confidence going forward. We don't want to get complacent here because there's a huge amount to go. We have to recognize that most of the country still has to transition. And also we have to keep in mind that in every market that went, we ensured that at least one analog signal continued that provided local news and information and other basic information so that nobody was left completely in the dark. On June 12th, when we go again next time, that's not going to be the case.
I think one of the things that everybody was having a little bit of angst about over at the agency in the last month before this happened was this idea of the call-in line, this whole national number, and there were various proposals on how to do a number, and then everybody finally came down to this sort of one integrated number. And you guys had some statistics that you released this week on the call volume, and it didn't seem to me that you really had that many calls, that the call center was actually perfectly capable of handling all these calls. It was something like, what, 27,000 perhaps on on Tuesday or Wednesday.
That's
I'm
right.
not sure. It didn't seem like really that many people were calling in. Does that just mean that it went pretty well?
I think it's a sign that things did go better than expected. Now, there was a lot of calls that also went into local broadcasters who we required to put up local numbers. But overall, the call volume was less than we anticipated, which I think is a sign that, A, we can handle the calls next time, although we're going to have to be prepared for a much larger call volume on June 12th, and also that things went more smoothly than expected. We had fewer concerns that were raised. Still, there were significant concerns raised, and the call centers were able to handle it. So I'm pleased with how that went.
Well, one of the stations that did switch over completely was KXXV-TV in Waco, Texas. Mike Lee is on the line. He's the Vice President and General Manager of that ABC affiliate. Mr. Lee, from your perspective, how did the switch over to digital go?
We felt like it went very well. I would agree with the Commissioner. We had fewer calls than anticipated. Most of those calls came on Wednesday. We signed off. Our market signed off at 11:59 p.m. on Tuesday night. The bulk of the calls came on Wednesday, and according to my notes here, most of those calls were from folks that already had converter boxes. They had scanning questions or hookup or installation questions. I kind of equated it to, it seemed like Tuesday was kind of the last shopping day before Christmas, and then Wednesday was Christmas Day when people opened up the boxes for the first time and tried to make them work. And we had about 60 calls over the course of the day, primarily. Why doesn't my box work, or what do I need to do to hook it up? And so we tried to walk these folks, through those steps over the phone.
Why did you go ahead on February 17th and make the switch?
I felt like the Waco market was ready. Our market is about 89% cable and ADS, which means it's about 11% over the air. I felt like that all of the stations here had done a really good job of informing the folks of what was coming. I know several of us have old analog transmitters that are just hanging on by a thread. The PBS station in Waco, their Channel 34 analog transmitter died 2 or 3 weeks ago, and so they went down and just had to advise the commission that we're on our digital-only channel because the analog died and there's no resurrecting it. So we were almost in that same position, but I just felt like as a market that we were ready to go. I think 89% is probably a little bit higher than average cable ADS penetration. So, we felt like that 11% of the market, I felt like that we could educate them, and I felt like that we could meet the commission's, this last set of guidelines that was issued. I felt like as a market we could meet and exceed those, and I feel like we did.
Mr. Lee, Amy Schatz of the Wall Street Journal has a question for you.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I just wondered if you have any advice for other station owners as they start getting ready to transition over before June or on June, and also if you have any advice for the agents about either the FCC or the NTIA or any of these other government officials about what they could do to make this easier for consumers.
My biggest advice to station managers and owners is work together. This market, we completely laid down our competitive arms, if you will. A couple of weeks ago here in my conference room, I had all 4 of the commercial general managers. I had 3 of the chief engineers. I had some creative people. So we sat down in this meeting, and we elected by unanimous decision that the NBC affiliate, which is a Channel 6, which their cost of operation is the lowest because they were a low-band V, we elected and they volunteered to be the nightlight station. We kicked around a couple of scenarios about, economically how to handle that. We agreed that we would split the cost of his electricity 4 ways. That was something we could all do as a market. Our station agreed to assemble the nightlight video, but all of the stations contributed. We basically gathered up all the half-hour shows, all the 30-second PSAs, English version, Spanish version, everything we had from the NAB, from the Texas broadcasters, from other organizations, so we could assemble, the nightlight video. We did that and helped them with that. So my number one advice to general managers and station owners is work together.
And and what's your advice, Mr. Lee, to the FCC?
Well, it all went pretty well. I mean, when we first saw the 8 bullet points that they issued a few days before, at first it seemed a little bit overwhelming. But as we went through that, we went through those point by point in our group meeting that we had. We we exchanged dozens of emails and stuff. But we just kind of divided that up. I got the Best Buy in Waco to be the consumer walk-in center. One of the other general managers went down in the southern end of our coverage area and recruited 2 more Best Buy stores down there. I guess my advice to the FCC would be is that most of these stations in most of these markets, they know their markets and they have a feel for where they are, and I think the stations know their markets and listen to the stations and take their advice, because most of us really do want to serve our viewers. We don't want our viewers to be without a signal. And if a station decides that they're ready to go off on the next tier, I'm sure they probably are if they've met these requirements.
Mike Lee, KXXV, thanks for being with us.
Glad to be with it. Thank you very much.
Jonathan Adlestein, what'd you hear?
Well, I think he's exactly right. We work together very well with the broadcasters. They did an outstanding job of stepping up to the plate on fairly short notice. The delay passed fairly late, shortly before the actual transition was to occur, and we had to work like lightning at the FCC, and our staff didn't get much sleep. I mean, they were working overtime trying to work with broadcasters in an extremely cooperative fashion to get this done. And we focused on those markets where there was a particular demand for help, because a lot of stations were transitioning early on February 17th, and we found enormous cooperation from the broadcasters trying to help us out. And we're thrilled with it. Our staff really did a fabulous job. We had over 100 people in the field on the day of the transition in these markets, working hand in hand with the broadcasters. And I think that that's a good lesson to say that we need to really rely on them. They understand their markets, they care about their viewers, and they really did step up to the plate in this circumstance.
Was it tough for Waco to get the FCC's permission to go ahead and do the switch on February 17th?
Well, we wanted to make sure, as he indicated, that in every market there was at least one station that continued to be a basic nightlight for the community. That is, to make sure that there was not only some continued analog programming about what to do with the DTV switch, but also some station that would continue to provide local news and public affairs. So at a minimum, one of the stations had to agree. Now in Waco, they all cooperatively sat down together, as he said, and came up with an agreement that NBC would do it. Different markets handled it differently. We gave broadcasters a lot of leeway as to how to work that out on a market-by-market basis, but we said the bottom line is we don't want to cut off any community. Congress intended that the public interest be served here, that ultimately nobody was left totally in the dark, but certainly everybody in Waco now is on notice. I mean, all they have left is that one station with a bit of an enhanced signal, but they are not up and running. I mean, if people there now have the message, if they want to watch their television programming, they need to switch. So we're really learning a lot from places like Waco.
I thought one of the really interesting things the FCC did this week was when you actually released data about the calls that were coming in from folks who were having problems. And it sounded like, at least on Thursday, which was I think one of the main call volume days, was that about 20% of the folks were having problems getting any channels. And another, almost 9% said that they were getting weak or spotty signals. And it seems like this goes back to the digital cliff idea that some of the digital signals aren't necessarily as strong. And also some channels in some markets actually have just changed where they're going to be broadcasting to. And so that there are going to be consumers, even if they get an antenna and a new DTV box, they're still not going to be able to get these channels. Is there anything the agency could do to help these folks, or do you think that they should do?
Well, we have taken some steps to help, but you're right, this is a real problem. We're getting a lot of complaints about signal loss. Sometimes it's just individual stations people lose, and sometimes they don't get any signals at all. Often when they get no signals at all, there's a problem with the way they've set up their converter box. They haven't scanned it properly, or they have an antenna that doesn't work properly. But losing individual stations when everything else is going well is a real typical problem. Now, in digital, as you indicated, it's kind of an all or nothing proposition. In analog, if you're getting a weak signal at the edge of the market, you'll get a snowy picture. But in digital, it's the so-called cliff effect, where if you're not getting a good signal, everything goes off. It's gone. So we are dealing with that by allowing broadcasters to put in place various additional transmitters and filling in these holes. We did it unfortunately kind of late in the process, so that I don't think enough of them had the opportunity to fill in those holes. The other thing that we did allow a lot of stations to do, as you said, is to move their overall signal so that they could change their footprint. Now, a lot of times they picked up new customers. They picked up a lot of additional viewers, but they left some behind. So net, they might have picked up 200,000 more, but they lost 50,000 that they didn't have before. For them, it's a winner because they end up getting more eyeballs, more advertising. But for those who are left behind, it's a real problem. And guess what? The people that lost stations called us, and those who gained additional ones said, oh, great, the benefits of digital. But we're hearing from those who lost the stations, and understandably so. So we're hoping that we can find ways to help them backfill. And over time, we'll continue to work with broadcasters in order to do that.
Another issue that's coming up is on, now that we've gone through the original transition date and the next transition date's not till June, what happens in between there? Are stations going to be allowed to switch in the interim, or is the agency going to be releasing rules or notice soon about what they want to do about that?
We're going to be releasing a notice right away about that. We're working on that today, trying to figure out exactly what the interim switch is. We think most stations will probably go at the end. They're either going to go on June 12th, or they already went on February 17th. There will be some that go in the middle, and Congress envisioned that. The Delay Act envisioned that we would give flexibility to broadcasters to do that. We're going to set aside the rules shortly and lay out some of the questions about how they have to go about doing that. We want to make sure that there's adequate notice to consumers. We want to make sure that there's a continued nightlight for viewers to get basic news and local information, as well as information about the digital transition on an analog station. So we're going to lay those out shortly, and there probably will be some stations that switch. So it's going to be an ongoing switch to some extent, but we still expect that the big bulk of stations are going to go on June 12th.
Commissioner Adelstein, were there any failures in the switch that the stations on February 17th made?
Well, there was no big glitches. Really pleased to report that no major issues that rose. I mean, one of the things that we discovered that surprised us a little bit was that on some of these digital converter boxes, you need to rescan. A lot of people didn't know they needed to rescan. And sometimes, something we hadn't yet experienced, it's a little technical, but a station will move from one location to another, and the box had already recorded their earlier location. So when you do a rescan, it wouldn't pick up their new location. So what we're telling people is when they rescan their boxes, in some cases, they have to rescan for all of their channels and not just add new channels. There's a sort of a prompt when you do a scan on your converter box that we didn't realize this, because before this big switch, we didn't have stations that were doing that were switching from one location to another. Like channel 6 might have moved from channel 6 to channel 32 or something like that. If that box already recorded that they were on channel 6, they wouldn't allow that switch. So we're putting out a new advisory that we're working on right now, telling people they need to switch all their channels over. They're going to rescan, do a total rescan.
Well, 27,000 or so calls came in the last 2 days, or right after the switch, to the FCC alone. Where's your call center?
Well, we have a call center in Gettysburg. We have some other call centers around. We also, the calls were received by IBM call centers that we contracted with that are around the country. And the cable industry stepped up and provided some additional capacity for us that helped to take the burden of calls. We were able to handle much more than that, and fortunately we didn't get a huge volume of them, but we could have taken even more calls.
So there's about 4 months left before the rest of the station switch. What can the FCC do in the next 4 months to sort of help consumers out? It seems like in the stimulus plan there was about a $90 million chunk of money that theoretically could come over to the agency pretty soon to help with that. Do you have any ideas yet about what you guys might want to do?
We do. We're talking about having a major outreach program with walk-in centers in every market in the country. So if people need to walk in and get help with their converter boxes, they can do that. We want to make sure that in every market in the country we have the availability of either volunteers or paid help to help those who can't do it for themselves. It turns out it's a smaller number than we expected, but some people who are elderly, might have a disability like arthritis, perhaps they don't speak English as a first language, just can't do this for themselves. For most people it's fairly easy, but for those who need help and don't have a family member that can help them, we want to be able to have somebody available to go in-home and provide assistance. We now want to make sure that our 800 number is coordinated with the local number so we can hand off calls to the national number and get those to a local number if there's local questions or very localized issues, or if somebody needs that kind of direct help in the home, we need to get it to the community. So we're going to improve the coordination between our national call centers and the local efforts that broadcasters and others are setting up around the country. And I think we need to have a more integrated national outreach effort.
What do you say to those people who may not have converter boxes or coupons by June 12th?
Well, they need to get on it right now. I mean, the fact is that you need to apply immediately in order to be able to make this transition. It's not that long of a delay, and to think you can wait until the last minute is a big mistake. Right now, there's a waiting list that the Commerce Department is going to work through. They think within a few weeks they can work off the entire waiting list of 5 million people who've applied. But the sooner you apply for a coupon, if you haven't already, the sooner you're going to be able to receive that coupon. Otherwise, you'll be stuck further back in the queue. So to get that, it takes several weeks to get that in the mail. Then you need to go out and you need to buy the box at the store. Then you need to get home and set it up. I mean, this whole process can take a few weeks or even a couple of months. So given that we only have a few months left, I'm advising people to immediately, if they haven't begun to do so, to apply, try the box out, see if they have a problem. If they have a problem, now they'll be able to get through and get somebody to help them. If they wait, there's going to be a crush. I think at the end on June 12th, it'll be a lot harder to get the help that people need.
Well, one of the stated benefits of the switch to digital TV was to free up spectrum space for first responders. How do you see that issue resolving?
Well, we freed up 24 megahertz, which is a lot of spectrum for public safety, for police, fire, ambulance, so that they can communicate with each other. In a lot of cases, they have, over the years, developed their own individual systems that don't talk to one another. Or the local communities, jurisdictions can't talk to the county, or the county can't talk to the county next door, or the local can't talk to the state and can't talk to the federal. The idea that was envisioned by Congress was an interoperable, nationwide broadband public safety network. So they could not only communicate with one another, but they could do so with broadband. For example, if a fireman out in the field was going into a burning building, we could have them send the blueprints for that building. Before they went in, they would know what they were dealing with structural issues, with where they're going. This could protect the lives not only of our first responders, but of the people whose lives they're out there to protect the public. This is an urgent, urgent need. We haven't yet succeeded in coming up with exactly how we're going to allocate that spectrum, how we're going to ensure that it gets built out, because local jurisdictions don't have the funding right now to pay for that kind of a nationwide interoperable broadband network. And we're working through, even today as we speak, how we're going to set that up so it works for public safety.
The agency recently had a public meeting where you had a lot of interest groups come in and talk about what you needed to do about the DTV transition. And it was sort of a remarkable hearing in that all the commissioners were basically sitting up on the dais and really sort of, I mean, you weren't sitting around like holding hands and singing Kumbaya, but it was like the closest we've seen in a while. How is it going at the agency right now? It seems like the atmosphere has kind of changed a bit.
We're working together very well. I mean, we have a new chairman, Mike Copps, who's acting chairman, while we're waiting the president perhaps nominating a new candidate for the chairmanship. But in the meanwhile, there's 3 of us. There's normally 5 on the commission, and we're working together extraordinarily well. Even if we don't agree on everything, the communication is much better than it used to be. The new chairman is undertaken what I call glasnost. There was some criticism of the previous regime that there was a real shutdown in communications, both between the commissioners and the staff and among the commissioners themselves. All of us always got along well, except for sometimes the way that the chairman was conducting business made it difficult for there to be a free flow of information. If communications is in our middle name, after all, we should be able to communicate with each other, with our own staff, and that's what we're doing now. It is tremendous. That kind of an open meeting where we're able to discuss things in public is wonderful, but also the fact that our staff no longer feels that they're being intimidated from communicating directly with us about their concerns. We're having open meetings. I can't tell you how many staff have come up to me and said what a relief it is, this new regime, and how much more open and free they feel about being able to do their jobs. After all, they are public servants, and they care about the agency, and they want to be able to participate in the decision-making. And too often they felt in the past that their views were disregarded, that there was only a handful of self-selected elite that were running the agency based on their own views. And now it's a real open, interactive dialogue with all the potential talent that we have from our staff contributing to a successful dialogue with all the commissioners and amongst the commissioners. So it's really a fabulous working environment for all of us.
So now that everyone is getting along and communication is really good, are there other issues that the agency might sort of be looking at in the next couple of months, or issues that they could that you guys could push out the door now? Because it seems like a lot of your time is going to be spent with DTV and trying to get that through June. But are there any other things that you think might come up?
One of the problems with the way things were being conducted is there was a huge backlog of routine items that really mattered to companies that are affected, that we need to get out the door and that weren't moving. We're going to try to work off that backlog of items that had sort of gathered. It's kind of like getting your teeth cleaned. We hadn't had it done in a while. Now we're going to get the underbrush taken care of. We were going to work on that. There's some other big items. We're concerned about media ownership for minorities and women. It's badly lagged, and we need to get working immediately on some studies to prepare for a new regime, a new set of ownership rules that will facilitate the diversity over the airwaves of ownership and of expression. So there are some areas I think we can move forward on, and I'm hopeful that with this cooperative, collegial environment that we have, that we can begin to do some of these routine items quickly and keep the business going of the commission.
Is 5 the right number of commissioners?
Well, I'm enjoying 3 right now, I can tell you that. But 5 is a pretty good number, it really is. You need to have that in order to have a good exchange. I think if there's only one member in the minority, having been in the minority myself, it's better if there's 2, so there's more possible permutations and there's more opportunities for collegiality, cooperation, and consensus. I think 5 is a good number. It used to be 7 previously, and that I think allowed for some even more interesting combinations in some ways, but 5 is good. I enjoyed that, but I'm certainly enjoying the 3.
You've always served in the minority on the commission, correct?
Well, there was a few weeks there in December of, I think, 2007 when we actually were in the majority for a couple of weeks, but we didn't have the chairmanship. It's very different when you're in the majority and you have the chairmanship on your side. These issues aren't particularly partisan. They're really, generally speaking, often there's regional considerations, but they're not very ideological. And so the tendency is to work together no matter who's the chairman. But the nature of the chairman, and Commissioner Copps, now Chairman Copps, is a real dedicated public servant, spent years in public service on Capitol Hill and at the Commerce Department, and is really an excellent facilitator of the commission moving forward in a positive way and very thoughtful way. So I think what matters most is who's leading the commission, and not necessarily how many there are or whether they're from one party or another. But certainly I think that this chairmanship is an enormous improvement over what we have, and we're finding the business of the commission being done, I think, much more efficiently now.
Amy Schatz, time for one more question.
Are there any pending issues in particular that you'd like to talk about that the FCC might like to sort of get out the door, the routine things that have been sort of sitting there for a while?
Well, there's one example of what we just did was Time Warner had a request in for over 220 days to do a routine spinoff of his cable operation. And that was being held up over an unrelated issue. The previous chairman felt he was going to take unrelated issues like a la carte and try to force them in what would otherwise be sort of a rubber stamp. Now, I'm never one to rubber stamp media transactions. This was deconsolidation. This was taking a cable company that was spinning off and dealing with a lot of the problems that Congress was concerned about with integrated cable companies that had programming and distribution. So to me, it was a no-brainer. You get it right out the door. And that's something we got done this last week, and thank goodness, because it was very difficult for the marketplace participants to do their job, to do their business with that kind of a real abuse of power taking place at the FCC. That kind of thing is not going to happen under this watch. I mean, we're going to get all kinds of routine items like that moving, and I'm really thrilled to say that business can continue. I mean, in this economy, we can't afford to be holding up any of the business of these companies that are already having all kinds of challenges due to the economic turndown. So I think we're getting back on track.
So there are no legal concerns about just the 2 vacancies of Deborah Taylor Tate and Kevin Martin? It's okay to operate with just 3 commissioners?
3 is the minimum that we need for a quorum. The commission could continue to operate even if there was only 2 of us, but they couldn't put out new rules or change any of the existing rules. So we are really in need of having at least 3, and as long as we have the 3 of us there working together well, there's no legal issues. But we do look forward to having a full commission, and I think it's always best when the commission operates at full power. And when we get a new chairman in that is appointed by the president and confirmed by the Senate, I think that's also better because we can then really take the commission more strongly in a new direction with that imprimatur.
Jonathan Adlestein, one of 3 remaining FCC commissioners, thank you for being on the Communicators.
Thanks for having me.
Amy Schatz, Wall Street Journal, thank you too.
Thank you.